There is a very specific kind of beauty in a shiny, matte black Dodge Challenger sitting on four rough concrete cinder blocks. It's a sight that really makes you appreciate the laws of physics, gravity specifically, and karma, generally. I was standing there on my front porch, leaning on my cane. The hickory one Martha bought me for our 40th anniversary, just watching the morning sun glint off the roof of that stranded muscle car. And I have to tell you, it looked less like a high-performance machine and more like a confused whale beached on the asphalt. There were two police cruisers flashing their lights, painting the whole street in a rhythm of red and blue. And right in the center of the chaos was Brenda Holloway, the self-appointed queen of Oak Creek Crossing, screaming so loud I'm pretty sure she was cracking the mortar on my brickwork. She was shouting about harassment, about knowing the mayor, about how her precious son Caleb was being targeted. But the young officer writing a ticket on the hood of that Will-less car didn't even blink. He just kept writing, the scratching of his pen the only sound cutting through her noise. But to understand why a 62-year-old retired structural engineer was smiling like a Cheshire cat while watching his neighbor have a meltdown, we have to rewind about 48 hours, back to when the world was normal and my biggest problem was just the ache in my left hip. See, I've got this hip, metal pins, ceramic ball joint, the whole bionic workup, courtesy of a construction site accident back in the late 90s, and it's not just an inconvenience. It's the barometer for my day. If the hip hurts, it's gonna rain. If it really hurts, I need my parking spot. And that spot isn't just a convenience. It's a necessity, a city-mandated, blue-painted, sign-posted rectangle right in front of my house that saves me from having to march across 50 yards of concrete which, on bad days, feels like the Sahara Desert. Martha was driving us home from my physical therapy session, and I was already fantasizing about an ice pack and a glass of sweet tea, just watching the familiar oak trees of our neighborhood roll by, thinking about how peaceful it was. We turned the corner onto Elm Street, and my heart just dropped into my stomach because there, taking up not just my handicap spot, but half the hash-marked access aisle next to it, was that menacing black Challenger. It belonged to Caleb, Brenda's 20-something son who still lived at home and seemed to believe that a loud exhaust pipe was a substitute for a personality. It wasn't the first time, mind you, it was the third time that week, and something inside me, maybe the structural engineer who spent a lifetime calculating load limits, just decided that the beam had finally cracked. I'm calling it in, I told Martha, my voice calm but tight, and she just sighed. That soft, long sigh that says I know you're right, but I hate the drama. And she pulled our sedan up to the curb 3 houses down. I dialed the non-emergency line for parking enforcement, a number I sadly had memorized, and while I was explaining to the dispatcher that yes, the signs were clear, and yes, the paint was fresh, the front door of the Holloway house swung open. It wasn't the tow truck that appeared, it was Brenda, marching down her driveway with that distinct, stiff-legged stride of someone who has never been told no in her entire adult life. She was wearing her signature floral blouse and a look of pure, distilled indignation, heading straight for our car like a heat-seeking missile. I rolled down the window as she approached, and she didn't even say hello, just launched right into it, saying, "Elias, honestly, are we doing this again?" Caleb just ran inside to grab his gym bag. He's been there for literally 2 minutes. Now, I'm a man of data, I like facts, and the fact was we had been sitting there for 10 minutes. And the engine of that Dodge was cold, stone cold. I looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Brenda, the spot is federally mandated. It's not a loading zone for Caleb's protein shakes, and frankly, if he's fit enough to go to the gym, he's fit enough to walk from your driveway." Her face went that blotchy kind of pink that clashes with everything, and she narrowed her eyes, giving me that look she usually reserves for people who put their trash cans out too early. "You know," she hissed, dropping her voice to a tone she probably thought was menacing. "Neighbors should help neighbors, Elias, not harass them with city ordinances. And if you want to play by the book, maybe the HOA board needs to take a closer look at your property." It was a threat, plain and simple, a petty, bureaucratic threat from a woman who treated the homeowners association bylaws like her personal Bible. Just then, Caleb came sauntering out of the house, not carrying a gym bag, not carrying anything, just spinning his keys on his finger, looking like a budget version of an action movie villain. He saw us, saw his mom, and just smirked, a lazy, arrogant tilt of the lips that made my blood boil hotter than the asphalt. He got in the car, revved the engine until the windows of my sedan rattled, a deep, throaty roar that sounded like violence, and then peeled out, screeching his tires, leaving a layer of burnt rubber on the road right in front of the handicap sign. Brenda watched him go with a look of maternal pride that was frankly disturbing, then turned back to me and said, "You'll be hearing from us," before spinning on her heel. She didn't waste time. The email hit my inbox that evening, right as I was finishing my tea. Notice of violation, unauthorized exterior structure. I opened the attachment, expecting maybe a complaint about my gutters or the grass height. But no, it was about the antique weather vane mounted on my garden shed. It's a beautiful piece, copper, shaped like a whaling ship. Been there for 15 years, but according to Brenda's sudden interpretation of Article 9, Section C, it was an eyesore and non-conforming roof debris. She was fining me $200. Martha read the email over my shoulder and chuckled, and said, "She's poking the bear, Eli. She really thinks she can bully you into submission." But see, Brenda made a critical error in judgment. She mistook my patience for weakness. I didn't get angry. I got organized. I spent the next morning on the phone, first with the property management firm that oversees the HOA, confirming that the bylaws actually had a grandfather clause for decorations installed prior to 2015, which my weather vane was. And then I called the city planner's office just to double-check the jurisdiction of that handicap spot. The city clerk, a nice fellow named Dave, confirmed what I already knew. That spot was city property, enforced by state law, and the HOA had absolutely zero authority to tell me who could or couldn't park there. I printed everything out, filed it into a folder I labeled Operation Oak Creek, and thought that might be the end of it, just a skirmish of paperwork. But that night, Caleb decided to escalate things from bureaucratic warfare to psychological terrorism. It started around 10 o'clock, a thumping bass that vibrated the floorboards of our living room, coming from the Holloway house. It was a party, and not a dinner party, but a full-blown rager. Cars were lined up on both sides of the street, blocking driveways, parked on lawns. I turned on my security monitors. I have a pretty robust system, for 4K cameras covering the perimeter, mostly because I like to watch the wildlife. But tonight, I was watching a different kind of animal. I saw kids stumbling around with red Solo cups. I saw a guy relieve himself on Mrs. Gable's prize-winning hydrangeas across the street. But the centerpiece was Caleb and his friends around that Dodge Challenger. Around midnight, Caleb got in, fired it up, and started doing what I guess they call a stationary burnout. Right in his driveway, clouds of white smoke billowing up, the smell of burning rubber seeping through my closed windows. It was aggressive, it was loud, and it was a clear message: I do what I want. I was saving clips, organizing footage, tagging timestamps, my engineer brain in overdrive, when Martha touched my shoulder and said, "Come to bed, Eli. Don't let them steal your sleep too." I went, but I didn't sleep well. I had this gnawing feeling that this wasn't just about noise or parking anymore. It was about dominance. The next morning proved me right in the most terrifying way possible. It was a crisp Tuesday, the kind of morning that usually makes you glad to be alive. Martha went out for her daily walk. She does 2 loops around the neighborhood. Rain or shine, it keeps her heart strong. I was in the garage, tinkering with a toaster I was fixing, when I heard the roar. I knew that engine note. It was aggressive, accelerating hard. My stomach dropped. I moved as fast as my bad hip would let me, getting to the garage door just in time to see the black blur of the Challenger tearing down the street. He must have been doing 50 in a 25 zone. And then I saw Martha. She was crossing the street, 3 houses down, in the crosswalk. She froze. You know that saying about a deer in headlights? It's real. She just locked up. Caleb didn't brake. He swerved. He jerked the wheel at the last second, the car fishtailing, the back end swinging out violently. He missed Martha by maybe 2 feet. 2 feet. If he had been a fraction of a second slower, or if the road had been slightly slicker. I couldn't even finish the thought. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down to check on her. He punched the gas, corrected the skid, and rocketed away, the exhaust cackling like a demon. I hobbled down the driveway, shouting her name, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Martha was shaking, pale as a sheet, standing there in the middle of the road. When I reached her, she just collapsed into my arms, sobbing quietly. That was the moment the switch flipped. The calm, rational engineer was still there, but he wasn't just building a case anymore. He was building a trap. I sat her down with a hot tea, wrapped a blanket around her, and went straight to the war room, my home office. I pulled the footage from the street-facing camera. I watched it. I watched it again. The rage was cold, hard, and sharp. I needed something more than a speeding violation. I needed something that would stick, something that Brenda couldn't make disappear with a phone call to the mayor. I started analyzing the car frame by frame. I wasn't looking at the speed. I was looking at the vehicle itself. And that's when I saw them. The wheels. In the video, when the car swerved, the sun hit the rims perfectly. They were custom, distinct, a complex spiderweb design, matte bronze with a carbon fiber lip. They didn't look like stock parts. They looked expensive, and they looked familiar. I closed my eyes, scrolling through the mental Rolodex of random information I accumulate. Where had I seen bronze spiderweb rims? Then it hit me. The VFW newsletter. I'm not a member, but I get the community blast. About a month ago, there was a post about a break-in at a garage downtown. Big Mike Kowalski, a retired master sergeant who runs the local auto body shop for disabled vets, had been robbed. They took tools, equipment, and a set of custom, one-of-a-kind prototype rims he had been working on for a show car. I pulled up the newsletter archives. There it was. The photo of the stolen rims. I put it side by side with the freeze frame of Caleb's car. It was a match. Not just a similarity, a match. The unique bolt pattern, the specific shade of bronze. Caleb Holloway wasn't just a reckless driver. He was rolling around on stolen valor. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He was driving a car funded by his mommy, on wheels stolen from a man who gave his legs for this country. I didn't call the patrol line this time. I called Detective Vance. I knew Vance from a few years back, when he needed consulting on a structural collapse case. He's a good man, tired, cynical, but honest. I told him, Vance, I think I found Big Mike's wheels, and you're never going to believe where they are. I sent him the files, the video of the near miss with Martha, the close-ups of the rims, the side-by-side comparison. Vance called me back in 10 minutes. Eli, he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. Big Mike marked those rims. Engraved his unit number on the inside of the barrel. If those are them, we got him on a felony. Possession of stolen property. Grand larceny if we can prove he took them. But we need to catch him stationary. He'll be back, I said. He always parks in my spot in the morning to unload his ego. We set the plan. It was simple, elegant, and ruthless. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I sat in the dark of my living room, drinking coffee, watching the street. The sun came up, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, a beautiful backdrop for the ugly thing that was about to happen. Right on cue, at 7:45 a.m., the black Challenger rumbled down the street. There were plenty of open spots. His own driveway was empty, but Caleb, being Caleb, pulled right into the blue handicap space in front of my house. He killed the engine, opened the door, and stepped out, wearing sunglasses in the early morning light. I texted Vance, the Eagle has landed. 2 minutes later, an unmarked sedan rolled up and blocked the Challenger from behind. A patrol car swooped in from the other end of the street, blocking the front. Caleb froze, his hand halfway to his sunglasses. Vance got out of the sedan, wearing a windbreaker that said police in big yellow letters. I stepped out onto my porch just as Brenda came flying out of her house, screaming, "What is the meaning of this?" It was like a play, everyone hitting their marks perfectly. Caleb started posturing, doing that chest-puffing thing insecure men do. "You can't block me in. Do you know who my mother is?" Vance ignored the noise. He walked straight to the front driver's side wheel, knelt down, and used a little telescopic mirror to look behind the spokes. The street was silent for 5 seconds. Then Vance stood up, looked at Caleb, and said, "Unit 101st Airborne. Looks like these belong to Sergeant Kowalski." Caleb's face went white. Brenda shrieked, "That's a lie. I bought him those wheels for his birthday." Vance looked at Brenda, calm as a frozen lake. "Ma'am, unless you bought them from a fence in an alley behind the auto shop 3 weeks ago, you're admitting to being an accessory." Brenda's mouth snapped shut so fast I heard teeth click. Then came the shove. Caleb, realizing his world was collapsing, panicked. He tried to push past the uniformed officer to get to his car door. He actually put hands on a cop. Bad move. In a split second, he was spun around, slammed against the matte black paint of his precious car, and cuffed. "Assault on an officer," Vance said, almost casually. "Add it to the pile." Now, here is where the poetry happens. Vance tells me later that since the wheels are evidence in a felony theft, they have to be seized immediately. But the car? The car isn't evidence. Just the wheels. And since the car was parked illegally in a handicap spot, it couldn't be left there on the street. But the tow truck for the car was hours out. So they improvised. Or rather, they followed procedure to the letter. The police evidence tech brought out a jack and 4 cinder blocks. Right there, in front of the whole neighborhood, because by now, everyone was watching from their windows. They jacked up that Challenger. They unbolted the bronze rims, one by one, treating them with more care than they treated Caleb. They lowered the car down onto the blocks. And that brings us back to where we started. Me on the porch, Brenda screaming at a ticket-writing officer, Caleb in the back of a cruiser, weeping, and that aggressive, masculine car, now looking like a pathetic, legless insect hovering above the pavement. The aftermath was swift. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that night. Brenda tried to preside over it, but the neighbors weren't having it. The video of Caleb nearly hitting Martha had circulated. I might have accidentally emailed it to the community distribution list, and the tide had turned. The motion to remove Brenda as president was unanimous. It turns out, people don't like their leaders shielding criminals who endanger elderly women. We later found out Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay for landscaping consulting, which suspiciously funneled into a company owned by her brother. That's a whole other lawsuit she's dealing with. But the best moment, the one I'll keep with me forever, happened about a week later. The city came out to repaint the lines. They made the blue brighter, the white wheelchair symbol crisp and sharp. I was out there admiring the work when a beat-up Ford truck pulled up. Big Mike Kowalski hopped out. Well, he swung out on his crutches. He's a big guy, terrifying looking if you don't know him, with a beard like a bird's nest. He looked at the spot, looked at me, and grinned. "Heard you're the reason I got my rims back," he rumbled. "Just doing my civic duty, Mike," I said. He reached into his truck and pulled out a box. "My wife made a pie, apple, and I brought you this." He handed me a small, heavy brass object. It was a custom-machined emblem, the logo of the Structural Engineers Guild, polished to a mirror shine. "Figured you appreciate good metalwork." We shook hands, and he drove off. Brenda eventually sold her house. The shame was too much, I guess, or maybe the legal fees were piling up. The last time I saw her, she was packing a box into a moving van. She looked at me, standing on my porch, and for a second, I thought she might come over and apologize. She took a step toward me, her mouth opening, but I just turned my back. I looked at my weather vane, catching the light, spinning freely in the wind. I didn't need her apology. The silence of the neighborhood was apology enough. So, here's the thing, and I want you to really think about this. We live in a world where people think loud equals strong, where they think rules are just suggestions for other people. But there is a distinct power in silence, in observation, and in simply letting people trip over their own arrogance. I want to know what you would have done. Would you have confronted the kid earlier? Would you have let the police handle it from day one? Or is there a part of you, that little part deep down, that would have enjoyed watching that car sit on those cinder blocks as much as I did? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, usually with a cup of tea and a smile. Stay safe out there, and watch where you park.